Rosie podcast. I'm feeling silly today, and that's good because I'm going to be getting into some nitty-gritty ideas, and talking about some vulnerable things and complex issues, and so, the silliness kind of helps keep it light and bouncy, and it's a great tool. So is humor. I guess they're kind of the same thing, but not really. Is anything really the same thing as anything else? No. That's why I love nuance. Meaning matters, people. It does. So you may have caught my last my last podcast interviewing the lovely Cara Lily, and that was my first podcast interviewing someone. This podcast will be just me, back to the basics, and I am going to practice the structure that I'll be implementing at least during podcast interviews, but also maybe just with me. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. And I want to practice that structure. So, starting with an introduction, my roles in the world, some of my educational background, and what I do for work, like I'll do in the future when interviewing anyone. So let's see. I do a variety of things. I just started seeing new clients again, working as I brand as an authenticity coach. Sometimes just for ease, I'll tell people I'm a health coach, and my specialties are authenticity and vulnerability coaching. So I love giving people a lot of presence and a safe space to access their inner world more deeply, which for many people still is kind of a scary place, or at least confusing, if not scary. And I love being a safe, open, non-judgmental, and still, what word do I want to use here? Sharp space. So I use that meaning like I'm not judgmental, as in I'm just going to be like, yes, 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 and nod at whatever my clients say. I'm also going to ask questions and kind of, press back a little bit when I see things that they're speaking that aren't congruent, right? So there's also that sharp edge that I offer. My educational background is in psychology. That's what my bachelor's degree is in. I did a semester and a half in a master's in counseling program. I finished like 2/3 and some change of massage school. I have hundreds of hours under my belt of offering body work to clients. Body work that may not be legal for me to offer because I'm not an LMT. So if it's not, I don't offer and never have offered body work. One day I will have a PMA, a private membership association, and will not play by your dumb legislative rules. # federal government. And so I do that. My client coaching on the side, I have what I call a busy work job. It's not a 9 to 5, but it's what for me is what most people would call their 9 to 5. It's honestly a really great job. I'm really blessed, having set really high standards for the company I'm willing to work for, the person I'm willing to be managed for, the team I want to contribute to, and I have found myself in a situation with a job that I really love, and that provides for me very abundantly, as I do for the company, and is very supportive for me in a myriad of ways, including for my personal business. Oh, what else do I do? Other things, I write and I do this podcast. Both are published on Substack at Naturally Rosie, Rosey. So my name is Rose. Sometimes I go by Rose, sometimes Rosie. It's not like you have to know what I want to be called. You can call me either one. Both are good. But that's why it's Naturally Rosie, Rosey, not Rosie. Yeah. What else? Yes, so podcast writing. Yeah, that's me. So yeah, you can find me on Substack, Instagram, both at Naturally Rosie, also on Twitter, or now X. I'm gonna keep calling it Twitter because I like that better. At Naturally Rosie. I'm on Facebook too. I don't do a whole lot of social media. Most of what I post is the content that I put out. I used to do a lot more. I did that thing where you're like, post 3 posts a day to build your business. And that was fun, but also not as fulfilling ultimately as like living my life off a screen and interacting with people in person. So social media, though. I have social media presences. Events that I have coming up. None right now. I facilitated at a retreat, did a workshop called The Neuroanatomy of Intuition at a retreat a couple of weeks ago. It was super fun. Thank you. Shout out to Oasis Teaching Farm in Marthasville, Missouri for hosting that and for having me. It was wonderful, beautiful people, wonderful time. Very rejuvenating. Yes. Okay, so, and then getting into this podcast, I'm going to be honing in on self-trust, and some of these ideas might sound familiar coming from me if you listen to episode 1. Excuse me while I burp. And I'm going to be getting into the weeds a little more. Parsing some nuance. If you know me, you can ask my friends. I like parsing nuance a lot. I'm definitely the person who is like, yes, but, to pretty much everything. Like, yes, that's true, but this. And sometimes there's room for the yes and, right? Yes, this is true, and this. And, sometimes there are things that are in direct contradiction to each other, and that's also worth pointing out. Not that one negates the other, and so there's a situation to use and there are times to use that word but, getting into a little NLP there. So throwing out some food for thought. What does it mean to trust oneself? How can we develop self-trust in practical ways? What are some barriers that you experience to self-trust? What are some forms of feedback that indicate that we are trusting ourselves? And to expand on that, what are some forms of feedback that indicate that I'm trusting myself more than I was? With, staying in this like growth mindset, expansion mindset. And what I mean by that is not only expansion, like, yes, there's room for contraction, for cocoon time, for, rest, for pulling inward. And what does that lead to in terms of a growth mindset? Well, it leads to more expansion past the point that we were before. Yay! So, growth mindset. How can we check our biases? So this is something that I don't believe, don't remember going into at all during that first episode. And it's so important that we be mindful of our biases, and have a way for checking ourselves, refining, being open to new data as it comes in, and upgrading our model that we're working with for how we're understanding ourselves and the world. Loosely, I call this like playing devil's advocate with myself. And that doesn't necessarily mean, doing that all the time. And it becomes particularly important in the context of our most firmly held beliefs. How can I check myself? Get into the whys of, why I believe what I believe. Why do other people believe things that are in direct contrast to that? Are there ways that I'm being limited because of, my particular perspective, limited as in not moving towards all that I can be, want to be, have the capacity, have the potential to be, as efficiently as possible. And then what are the qualities in relationships with other people that support self-trust? That one feels particularly pivotal, because cliche saying, we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. At some point, maybe I'll actually play devil's advocate with myself here and look up these studies. I've seen them referenced, but have never actually looked them up. And if you're familiar, if you've gotten into like personal growth type literature, often studies are referenced that show that we make the average income of the 5 people we spend the most time with. We have the average, values of the 5 people we spend the most time with, etc., etc. So that being said, what in a process of learning to trust oneself more and more deeply, what are the qualities in the relationships around us that will support that? A good question here is, why do I want to trust myself? Why would I even be motivated to do that? That may seem, some of you may have like an obvious answer to that. That may seem obvious to you. And some people less so. For me, and what seems to be true for me, from in an objective way to me, as to why it is beneficial for me to develop trust in myself, is that I am ultimately my only and most pivotal and core guide in my life, certainly as an adult. That is not to say that there are not other people who help me, who guide me, who offer me assistance. And at the point that I am acting with any degree of autonomy, right? So at the point that I'm moving around independent of my caregivers at 1 year old, any autonomy that I give away is that becomes a choice to give away my autonomy. So how and what is the way that I can be most in control of my life is by claiming my autonomy, by claiming my capacity to navigate the world by my own choice, by claiming personal choice, okay? To whatever degree that it's available to me in the moment. So whether that's my choice to take a particular action, or my choice to view something a certain way, or my choice to pause and take a breath instead of reacting right away, or my choice to stay with something that's challenging or leave something that's challenging. All of the, I'm infinite examples there. Why do I want to trust myself? Why do I want to build my self-trust? Is so that I can claim all of the autonomy that I have available to me. And for me, as an adult, not a normal per se adult, but as an adult that has my full range of capacity, I have full mobility. I have my intellectual properties are fully functioning. I don't know that I would consider myself neurotypical necessarily, but as far as neurotypicality in as it applies to like being an adult, taking care of myself, creating a life that I want, I have full capacity of all of those things. Okay, so if you are also in that category, and if you're listening to this, you almost certainly are, how can we give ourselves that full capacity? A lot of it, if not all of it, is based in our ability to trust ourselves. Because when we don't, wherever those edges are, wherever we're lacking in self-trust, we're preventing ourselves from even stepping into that autonomy, that next level of choice. Because if you don't trust yourself, of course you're not going to make the choice that you want. Which makes sense, right? There's a logic there. If I don't trust myself, I'm not going to do what I want to do because I don't trust my desires, specifically in that case. Okay, so some questions there, some food for thought. This episode will be split into 2 parts. First half available publicly on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I told y'all I'm being real silly today, and there's only more of that ahead. I'm gonna pause now and drink some water, and you're gonna be able to hear the loud gulps that I take of my water. Welcome to being on the phone with me. Many a friend has commented on how much water I drink when we're on the phone together. Okay, so first half of this episode will be available, well, and really I'll split it into 2 episodes, but the first half of this recording will be free, publicly available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and my Substack. And we'll be focusing primarily on the introspective aspects of self-trust, mindset, interacting with the different parts of ourselves, mental, emotional, physical, and then just kind of practical ways that we can build self-trust. What are some of the barriers, etc. How to build that self-trust muscle. The second half of this conversation will be available only to paid subscribers of the Naturally Rosy podcast. There is the option to do a 7-day free trial. If you at whatever point that you want to use that's an option. The second half of this conversation will be available to paid subscribers of the Naturally Rosy Substack. I'll be diving in more into analyzing current cultural scenarios and the integration of personal responsibility, self-trust, and nuanced thinking into the real life things, particularly things that feel relevant to me and important to me to talk about. So that will be available to paid subscribers. Okay. So, how to build self-trust. So, one of the biggest, if not the quintessential barriers to self-trust is the limiting beliefs around self-trust, right? Like, why shouldn't I trust myself? Why wouldn't I trust myself? If you want to do a cool exercise to kind of see what your answers to that are, I invite you to get out a pen, pencil, and some paper and ask yourself that. Literally journal about that. Why wouldn't I trust myself? And be totally honest. Like, it's totally great, like, wherever you're at. Why wouldn't I trust myself? Well, maybe it's because in the past, decisions that I've made haven't panned out the way I thought they would, or have resulted in detrimental things for me. Maybe it's because I was taught that I'm not trustworthy, in a variety of ways. Perhaps that's because in general people aren't trustworthy, and so I'm not trustworthy. Maybe it's I can't trust my desires because they're sinful. I'm just going to use the easy example there. A wide variety of reasons why you as an individual might not trust yourself or might trust yourself less than you do. Or, sorry, less than you can. Okay, right? So we're aiming for as much self-trust as possible. Like self-trust that's pervasive, even through recognizing that we won't always be accurate and we won't always be precise, and we're gonna screw up and be messy, and that's great. And how can I still trust myself? How can I still listen to that part of me that is way more in tune and has collected way more data than I'm consciously aware of? We could just loosely call that the subconscious, which is taking in, it's estimated 11 million bits of data per second. We're consciously aware of about 40 to 50 bits of data. Okay, so what happens with all of that data is that we build a framework to work on, okay? So we have a lot more awareness available to us than we're often, than we're ever consciously aware of. And in order to pull up that the data, the awareness that will bring us closest to what we want, well, first we have to start trusting what we want. Otherwise, that data is going to it's not going to float to the surface because it's going to be useless. Why would I want to keep track of data that would get me to where I want if I don't trust that what I want is good or that I can know how to get there? Well, that data becomes useless, so it sinks to the bottom. If I train myself, though, to believe genuinely, if I reprogram myself to genuinely believe, I have what I want is good, I have the capacity to get to what I want, and I have all the tools that I need to get there, then the data that I've already collected will slowly start to work its way to the surface, and we will become more honed into new data in our environment that is contributing to us building in that direction of what we want as well. I'm going to drop in here and just give... I've mentioned this a couple of times. I want to ground, what we want, which can seem kind of abstract, into the evolutionary principle of enlightened self-interest. This idea that what is best for the whole is when each individual is seeking, creating, building, going after what that individual wants, and really that's true only when done with integrity, which means that the person is recognizing, it's not just like it's not about building a life that's only good for me, and no one else. That would be miserable for the individual, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense for the individual. Enlightened self-interest benefits the whole because we optimize our experience when we're contributing to and being contributed to by community. And essentially what it means is I'm not going to compromise my standards. I'm not going to compromise what I'm creating, what I'm going after, because anyone around me is compromising their standards or simply because we are going in different directions. I'm going to maintain my direction and my standards. And I'm going to trust that there are people, and I'm going to connect with people who can help me build and who I can help build in a similar direction. So what we want, so trusting that what we want is good. This, at least in my experience, has been a huge hurdle to get over, just trusting that my desires are good and heartfelt and benevolent, kind. And that following my desires is a worthy pursuit. Practical ways of retraining that, includes monitoring and reprogramming thought patterns, monitoring and reprogramming emotional patterns. Lots of nuance to that I'm not going to go into today. And what I do want to explore in more detail is the practice of listening to the inner voice, and listening to that inner voice with compassion and curiosity. Especially if this is a newer practice for you, there's probably like a queue of things lined up that have been trying to knock on your conscious mind, trying to get you to listen to them for a while. At least that's how it was for me, even after, just not even 25 years and starting this practice. I mean, there were so many things that that essentially I got the chance to reparent, to listen to hold space for inside myself. And so practicing listening to our inner voice with compassion and curiosity. And I say our inner voice like it's a consistent inner voice. Let's get real. Most of us have a whole committee of voices inside our head, at least that's my experience talking to people. Maybe yours is not as varied as mine. But probably, though, if you start to tune in, you'll notice different, whether different personas come up per se, or you'll notice that your thought patterns are, essentially you can just notice that thoughts are often in conflict with each other, right? Like, I love that person, I hate that person, right? Okay, well, how is that both true? There's, and emotions as well, often in conflict, dualistic. Okay. That's how they are. That's great. No biggie. And taking the time to, put some story to our mind, put some archetypes, put some personas to the different parts of our psyche so we can recognize them more readily can be very helpful. Like, oh, here's, cliche, here's the inner critic voice again. Oh, hi. Or, oh, here's the inner voice that's never happy with anything. Okay, hi. Oh, there's the inner critic, or there's the inner voice that, dreads getting up in the morning, right? Whatever it is. Noticing, kind of clumping together certain facets, certain details of the person of your psyche into personas, archetypes, just so that you can consciously recognize them more readily and learn to interact with them over time in a more efficient way can be very helpful. And really exercising that muscle of being the observer. Okay, so something that has helped me tremendously over the past 5-6 years is this idea that I am not my emotions, I am not my body, I am not my thoughts or my mind, I am the observer of all of those things. And this is, whether you want to look at that as metaphorical and not literally true, or whether to you that is literally true, in this scenario it doesn't necessarily matter. The point is to offer yourself space to detach from the emotions, from physical sensations, from thought patterns, in order to see the bigger picture, i.e. patterns of such things, because as we strengthen that observer muscle, it's like we're zooming out. We're less lost in the sauce, and we're more watching the sauce. And then in watching the sauce, we can be like, oh, I didn't notice it before, but I think the sauce could use some more salt. It's kind of bland. I think it needs some more salt. And you know what would be really good? It would probably complement the salt. I'm going to put in a little bit of honey, make it a little sweet too. And it's difficult to notice how we want to tweak ourselves when we're caught up in identifying with our thoughts, with our emotions, with physical sensations. And even, I mean, that can be true not only of those, very basic tenets. It can also be true if we're overly identified with certain roles in our life. I am daughter, I am of this certain religion, I am someone who lives in this particular place, I am someone with this particular job, etc. Again, it's really easy to get lost in those identifiers when we're not practicing, oh, this is just a costume I'm putting on right now. It's something I'm consciously choosing. It's changeable. It's malleable. I have freedom in my relationship with this thing. It's not my identity. When we're identifying with something, when we're over-identifying with something, specifically, but let's hone in on when we're over-identifying with something, it's difficult to unentangle, right? So when we're practicing being the observer of our internal world and of our internal world in relation with our external world, that offers us the freedom to, well, really it gives us the somatic sensation of the freedom that we always have to change those things, to make different choices, to change our thought patterns, to change our emotional patterns, to relax around physical sensations that previously we were contracting around and so exaggerating, to change the roles that we're playing in our life. Yes, so practicing being the observer, mindfulness meditation is wonderful for that. Being in a place, practicing observing oneself with minimal stimulation, minimal external stimulation, so as to remove the many things that are easy to project our psyche on in our external world. That can also be really challenging for various reasons. And so also getting in touch with the body through various practices, letting ourselves do things like free draw, like just draw with no intention, color with no intention, paint with no intention, be creative, freely creative, move our body however we want without a plan. Doing these things can help us get in touch with that observer part of us, feeling free to change and shift how we do things, because it helps us realize really how temporary everything is. A lot, I mean, the huge kind of the one barrier to that over-identifying with something brings up is the sense of this is permanent, right? I'm this thing forever. And on one hand, it's like we could expand to we could use the ideology, and I do often, I've found it very helpful, of I am everything, or at least I have the potential to be everything, not all at once enacted, and I have the potential to enact infinite ways of being. Kind of lost my train of thought there. And yes, so getting into a free flow state, an interesting now like neurological state that's being studied, very good for focus actually, which can seem counterintuitive to the term flow state. getting in touch with that through some kind of activity or mindfulness practice, yoga, etc., body practice, helps us get in touch with how temporary really everything is. And that can just essentially like shake us free from the sense that things are so permanent, which we often don't, we don't know that we're stuck in that way in relationship to a particular identity until we do. Yes, that was a cyclical comment. It really had no meaning. Later in this episode, I'm going to talk about playing... I already did kind of mention playing devil's advocate with myself. I really like calling myself out these days, including out loud. Like, just, it's easier, if you just acknowledge as soon as you notice that, oh, I did that thing that wasn't in alignment with how I want to be, or how I feel inside, or how I am. And something I'm going to continue to hone in on during this conversation is the importance of meaning. The importance of meaning! I said to someone the other day, I'd like to think that most of the things that I say, the vast majority of them, I would love to think that the vast majority of the things that I say are intentional, are meaningful, are relevant and purposeful in the current context. And then I kind of followed that up with a half-joking comment of, but maybe everyone thinks that. Maybe everyone thinks that about what they say. Actually, I imagine a lot of people just don't care. And certainly there's space for that as well. And that can also be intentional. We can also have the intention to, I'm just going to say whatever I want right now, and I'm trusting that this space is, like, me doing that in the space that I'm choosing to do it in, it is not going to produce negative repercussions for myself or whatever may be around hearing me. There can always be intention, including if the intention is to be unintentional. Cue water break. Glug, glug, glug. Just kidding, I haven't started drinking yet. Okay, so the importance, there is an infinite importance of clarity in what we say and in what we mean by what we say. So clarity in what we say, as in, is what I'm communicating to this other person actually getting across? Is the other person hearing the message that I mean to convey? And there is so much room for miscommunication all the time. It is very easy for us to misunderstand each other. Most of the time, even if we are misunderstanding each other, it's in such minute detail that the meaning is still essentially conveyed, and so it works. And we can see over time the degree to which we are miscommunicating, because those problems will emerge, positively correlated to the degree that we are miscommunicating. And that's not like making anyone wrong, it being someone's fault that there's miscommunication happening. I mean, it is often, it's often simply a lack of intentionality. And sometimes there's ignorance there too. So the importance of clarity in what we say, and the importance of clarity in what I mean by what I say. So it's not just about, am I portraying clearly to you what I mean to say, it's also, am I clear on what I mean by what I say? So there's two conversations going on. There's the conversation going on with yourself, and there's the conversation going on with the other person. I love using I love using the term matters, matters, this way. Gosh, lots of water burps. Okay, meaning matters, literally. So meaning matters, as in materializes, literally. That's what I mean by literally, is that meaning materializes. So even if it's not something that we're consciously aware of, even if I'm having a miscommunication with myself and I'm continuing to express something that I don't really mean, even though I'm not saying it, that message that I do really mean, that's what's going to materialize. That's what's going to manifest in my reality. This isn't only with words. There's also tone here, which is important, especially for humor, right? There's a lot of so something, I'm just going to go to a concrete example. So the man that I've been dating is super funny and makes jokes a lot, and he uses a lot of sarcasm, and a lot, and one type of humor that he plays into a lot is self-deprecation. And now it's really funny to me, but before I got to know him well enough to know that he was using dry, sarcastic humor when he was being self-deprecating, the meaning that I heard from him was very literal. It was, me hearing that he had a low self-concept, and so I would be responding to that meaning instead of to the humor that he intended. So in here, I'm using that as an example of, he was clear on the meaning with himself, but the meaning was being lost in translation to me, particularly because I was over-focusing on his words instead of the tone. So there's two, so words matter and tone matters. They both matter. Literally, they both materialize. That's a funny joke to me. Nerdy joke. Meaning matters. Okay. I hope someone else got that. Clarity. It's important. Meaning matters. And foundationally, our relationship with ourselves matters. So how am I interpreting my thoughts, my emotions, my physical sensations? What meaning am I creating from those things? What's the story I'm telling myself around my thoughts, my emotions, my physical sensations? Okay, I asked a couple of my lovely coworkers last week. I asked them the question, what are barriers that you experience to self-trust? And the two general answers that I heard, and I'll just share generally, were courage and past experience having gone unexpectedly, not as intended. Okay, so I'm gonna hone in on courage first. Courage, I'm just gonna offer quickly, not rushing, and I'm being mindful of the time. Two practical ways to build courage. One is literally practicing the feeling. Okay, so sitting and and just cultivating the feeling of courage. And maybe that's along with some symbology. For me, like a lion comes to mind. Maybe you like get on the floor and you practice being a lion. Maybe you do some animal play. However you can bring up and cultivate literally the feeling, the emotion. And this isn't just for courage, it's for any state, any emotional state. Practicing feeling that actual emotion in your body. It's not enough to just think, I am courageous, I am courageous, I am courageous. That's helpful, and what's going to actually change your life experience is feeling the sensation of courage. So whether that's literally just like practicing feeling that feeling, at home, maybe pretending to be an animal that you imagine as courageous, maybe sitting in the mirror and talking to yourself, pep talking yourself, whatever works for you to cultivate that feeling in a contained space, or doing things that push you out of your comfort zone. So doing things that actually like prove to yourself like, wow, doing things that kind of force you to be like, wow, to force you to recalibrate, because in order to have done the thing, you must have courage. So in order to step outside your comfort zone, that requires courage. So stepping outside your comfort zone is another great way to reprogram yourself to feel more courageous, because you're literally evidencing to yourself that you are courageous. Courageous. Courage comes from the heart. It's another thing I like to say. Core. That root word of courage means heart. Core. It literally comes from the heart. So remember that, especially if you are someone who associates courage with strength, like physical strength, like I can bench 200 pounds. That's not me. I can't do that. Cannot do that. Relocate that strength to your heart. It's actually, courage comes from the heart. It's not a sense of strength in your physical body, it's a sense of strength in your emotional body. Okay, and then getting to relationships. What in relationships is helpful for self-trust? So I like to say that, people talk about like, oh, I can't trust that person anymore. Or I really trust this person, and I feel like we would do really well to parse some nuance there and just ponder, okay, I mean, the way that I think about it is I can trust everyone to be the person that they show me that they are. I can trust an environment to be the environment that it shows me that it is. And I find that to be wildly more helpful than just a very overly simplistic, I trust this, I don't trust this. It's like, okay, what does that mean? It's so vague, it almost has no meaning. When we're looking for relationships that we can trust, we can hone in on, why am I in this relationship? Is this person showing me over time that they are reliable in the qualities that are motivating me to be in that kind of relationship? Okay, so for example, if I have a friendship with someone, I feel motivated to nurture friendships in which the person is honest, in which the person is, I'm just going to make shit up, creative, in which the person is financially, growing financially and making and aiming to make more and more money, and they're doing that, right? Like, okay, well then I can just look at my friendships, and I can be like, oh, are you doing these things? Okay, check. Oh, I'm not there. Okay. So then if someone's not meeting that, that's totally, I can still continue to stay in the friendship and, be mindful of like that lack of alignment when that topic might come up. So if, for example, so this is an actual example from my life. I really want to have children. That's a long-held goal of mine, is to have children. And I recognize, and I notice just that like quality of parenthood, that aspect of parenthood in my friendships very quickly. Whether it's they have had children, they want to have children, they haven't, and they don't want to have children. I notice those things, and then I notice how, if they're living in if, for example, like they also haven't had, so I haven't had any children yet. If I, and then I notice in my relationships with my friends who also haven't had children yet and know they want to have children, I can notice like, okay, how are you curating your life in order to support that goal? Can I trust that you trust yourself to be moving towards that goal based on the actions that you're taking? And if they are, then I'm probably going to lean more into learning from them on the topic of parenthood, or for example, the friends that I have that have children, what kind of parent are you? How do you parent? Do you parent in a way that's in line with how I want to parent? And then I can, and are you doing that over time? Can I trust that aspect about you? Great, I can learn a lot of things from you. If not, no biggie, all good. We can be different. We can have differences, and I'm not going to lean so much into learning from that person on the topic of parenthood. It's an example of what I'm talking about. Does this person have what I want in the aspect that I'm trusting them? Okay, so another example, just health. Is this person taking care of themselves, taking care of their physical body in a way that I want to take care of my physical body? Great, then there's things that we can learn from each other in that aspect. If not, no biggie. And I'm not going to trust that I can learn things from them or learn as much from them in that aspect. Example. So breaking down that, what you trust someone with, how you trust someone can be very helpful, as opposed to just, I trust that person, I don't trust that person. Yeah. And then in a more general way, I have really benefited from practicing trust in the benevolence of life. And this is not to say that I'm blind and life is only benevolent. Actually, the wording that I have written down is trust in the potential benevolence of life. So, how we act, how we perceive and how we act, how we respond to life, very significantly impacts what we experience. If I'm operating from a place of trusting in the potential benevolence of life, I'm going to respond very differently than if I'm trusting in the potential scariness of life, for example, right? So it's just a choice to use a certain lens in order to reap the most fruit, as opposed to using a lens where you're not gonna reap the most fruit, because why the fuck would you do that? I can answer that. That was a redundant question. It was not a real question. It was a funny question. Are you laughing yet? Okay. I love my friend and producer who gives me little smirks and laughs and reacts to the things I say. Okay. All right. So, and then like some more nuance, a little more nuance before we talk about the last thing we're going to talk about before we end this half. Trusting different parts of ourselves, okay? So learning to trust our body, learning to trust our mind, learning to trust our emotions, learning to trust our intuition or our spirit. For me, intuition and spirit are essentially interchangeable, and they don't need to be for you. It's your imagination station. Live how you want. Yeah, so trusting, like, okay, if my body's telling me something, however my body is, there's a reason why. My body's tired, there's a reason why. My stomach's hurting, there's a reason why. I feel really energized, there's a reason why. And just learning to trust that the body is something that makes sense. I hear a lot of negative self-talk that people have about their bodies, which, to my perspective, is only pushing them further away from curating their body in a way that they want it to be. So yeah, I found a lot of benefit in just learning to trust my body and that there's a logical reasoning behind its communication with me. Because again, trusting that, then the next step is, oh, well, why? And then just asking that question plants the seed in my subconscious, and I start to notice patterns as to why I'm feeling physical sensations in a certain way at certain times. And it's more data, right? And then I feel freer in my capacity to choose a physical experience that I want because I have more data. And I can test that biofeedback, right? I can make the choice and I can notice the response from my body and I can upgrade my model. Trusting our mind. I often feel somewhere on the spectrum of frustrated to humored, hearing people talking about talking about the mind in like a negative way. And I understand why that is. It's a pendulum swing to the opposite side of what a lot of other people are experiencing, which is being stuck in their heads. And so there's like the pendulum swing away from that is get out of your head, get out of your mind. And I'm going to suggest that the middle path there is simply learning to be present with the mind, like the body, like emotions, like intuition, spirit, all very, very helpful collectors of data, collectors and disseminators of data. And it's up to us how we curate and interpret each, how we relate to each. And making the mind a bad guy, I'm going to suggest, will only curb your ability to use it to its full potential. So learning to trust our mind, learning to trust our consciousness to be present with and explore our minds, and which is why it can be fun to do little games like we were talking about earlier of, archetypes and who's on my committee. And I played this game for a while. I haven't been using it recently, but for a while I had what I was calling the Quantum Council of Roses. And essentially it was this schematic I made up, actually maybe kind of got from, or it was inspired by truly probably Rick and Morty, the infinite Ricks and the infinite Mortys. So applying that to myself, having this quantum council of roses, like every possible version of rose, and then a core council of roses that were the closest to the rose that I will become in this lifetime. And those are the roses that are giving me insight into the next steps in my life. And I can look at that and recognize that it's a story I'm telling myself, and at least for the time I was using it, and you know, if it feels helpful again, I'll use it again. It was very helpful. It was extremely helpful. So there's certainly room to use imagination and story and play and metaphor. Metaphor is a very helpful tool for navigating human life. So and very helpful, especially I think in my experience, for navigating the mind and emotions, which can seem very abstract. Trusting our emotions, learning to trust how we feel, our desires, our emotional expression, and also our ability to contain our emotions. I've noticed a variety, I've noticed different results, each having their own benefit, each having their own maybe optimal time and space, when used, when practicing like wild, uninhibited self-expression, and then also learning to sit with my emotions without expressing, and allow them to transmute. Inner alchemy. I'm throwing out these terms. I could go more in depth about how that internal process is for me, and it's not the time and place. Essentially, though, it's the observing of my inner world, particularly physical sensations and emotions, as I witness them and watching how they change. And then experiencing some new insight afterwards as a result of having held that alchemical container for myself. And that same process, the same as an alchemical process, also can happen through self-expression. It's just that the container then becomes the environment as opposed to the internal awareness. Yeah, trusting our intuition, trusting that when there's something tugging, something that keeps coming up for us, something we continue to feel discontent with, that there's something there, that there's something that wants our attention, and turning to confront what that is to every season, turn. There's a lot of meaning in that metaphor. And being willing just to be curious and compassionate in our attitude towards shadow, towards what is in the shadow. Yeah. The practice of getting in touch with our inner observer. So we learn to trust ourselves to explore our inner and outer worlds curiously and mindfully, and not reactively. And I feel like that's a very kind of concrete fear that keeps a lot of people from exploring, is not only the fear of what will happen to me, what will the reaction be from my environment, but also how will I react in the face of these new things. So as we practice and we learn to observe ourselves more and build that self-trust, that fear of reactivity, both from ourselves and others, fades. And so we can explore our shadow more inside ourselves, in the world, and still feel fortified internally by our light, by our courage. There's a really wonderful book called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. It's this wonderful book on shadow work. Shadow work is essentially the exploring of the parts of ourselves that we push away, the parts that have become taboo, forbidden, bad, and that book, The Dark Side of the Light Chasers, was very, very helpful. I mean, step-by-step guide almost in doing that internal work. And really, it's a practice of learning to trust all of the aspects of self. So what I spoke before is that we all have the potential to embody an infinite variety of personas, characters, lives that we create. And from all of those infinite possibilities, we get to choose. Okay, so what do I want? What do I want? Or what do I feel, zooming out from that slightly, you might be at, what do I feel is best? And I really want to ground in getting in touch with what you want, because that's going to provide you with the most motivation and energy to proceed forward with. And also the most long-lasting clarity, or integrity, rather. It's really easy if we stick with, I'm going to do what's best, or I'm going to do what's right. It's really easy to get caught up in giving away our authority to a variety of other sources. Honing in on what do I want, eradicates that pretty quickly. Not simply, it's challenging, and provides a very direct route to deep integrity that will create a very efficient, though sometimes tumultuous, route towards a life that we love. And that feels invigorating and fulfilling, not only for us, but for the people around us. That is, yes, of service, and is also rewarding and worth living. And that's what I want. If that's not what you want, I don't know that this is the right podcast for you. And feel free to listen anyway. Snap. So shadow work is a practice of learning to trust all of those aspects of self, especially the ones that you don't choose to express, and especially the ones that you haven't been expressing in the past. Learning to honestly trust all of the aspects, and again, trusting them to be as they are. Not trusting them to be kind to you, not trusting them to be the ones that you want to embrace. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about getting to know those characters, so as to desensitize reactivity to those parts of the self and those parts of others. The goal here is simply to desensitize the nervous system to what it has learned to be hypersensitive to, in particular. And there's always a gold nugget in the shadow. There's always light in the shadow. There's always something to learn. Even if you explore an aspect and you don't want to embrace any of it, you'll still feel clearer on your relationship with that aspect than you did prior. You'll have more compassion and empathy for that part in yourself. For example, you have the potential to destroy, to be destructive. You might not choose to enact that, and you certainly have that potential to be destructive. And learning to get in touch with that part of yourself will, it will allow you to see the light sides, the benefits of that part of yourself. And it will also allow you to have more compassion, empathy, and understanding for that part in others. As an example, there's lots of aspects, infinite ways you can do shadow work, whether focusing on emotions, archetypes, etc. etc., etc., etc. I hope someone listening to this has seen The King and I, so that they get that joke. Okay, well, this is wrapping up the first half of this episode, and we will be proceeding forward with, this is the first half of this conversation. It'll be episode 10 of the Naturally Rosy podcast when it's published. Thank you so much for joining me. And if you're enjoying this conversation, if you enjoy the content that I put out and you're not already a paid subscriber, I would love for you to join me on the other side of the paywall for additional content, additional articles, my archive of articles. Currently, you have to be a paid subscriber to access any articles that I've published over 6 months ago. So you get the entire archive with a paid subscription, and you also get the second half of this podcast and or the second half of this conversation. So episode 11 and the second half of these longer conversations, including interviews going forward. The second halves are more in depth, more vulnerable, more personal. Subscription is $5.55 a month, or $55.55 for a year. And yeah, that's it. That's pretty much what I've got. Happy to be sharing myself with you, and excited to see more of yourself out in the world, your authentic self out in the world. Oh shit, we didn't talk about, as much as I wanted to, playing devil's advocate with oneself. Well, we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about it more in the second half. So join me there if you would like to. And if you don't want to, then please don't.